My name is Adrian, and I've had depression, and this is my story.
Depression and anxiety, an issue that has rapidly been on the rise in the 21st century. According to the World Health Organization, it is estimated that 5% of adults suffer from depression. However, with teens ages 12 to 17, this average increases to 13%. This means, on average, 1 out of every 8 teenagers in the nation has or is suffering with depression. But what exactly is depression? Why is it a problem? And how does it affect those suffering from it?
Depression it's a common word that's being used in the society when someone is feeling down, they're feeling hopeless, they're feeling overwhelmed. There is this, I usually tell my patient, they feel like there is a dark cloud above them. And they feel this, they are in a state where they start isolating themselves. There are these group of symptoms when they are present for a certain period of time. We start saying the person may be sad, depressed, but then it gets to a stage where it can lead to something we call clinical depression.
The definition, there's so many definitions. There's a diagnostical statistical manual, which has a diagnosis in there, but it's really different for everyone based on nature and nurture. So there are definitely some similar attributes when you're looking at, so the first thing psychologists do is look at the difference between abnormality and normality. So what is considered normal? What is considered abnormal? So when you say someone has depression, it needs to be chronic, intense, like last for a long time. So students in my class at least tend to try and diagnose themselves really quickly, but there actually is criteria for it.
It's a condition when you start losing sleep, you start losing appetite, you might have more appetite, you might be a person that I don't want to do anything, and it can get to a stage where it could be very, very serious when the person then start having thoughts of self-harm and they don't want to live anymore. So it starts from sadness, not feeling well, no interest, no energy level, but it can get to a point where a person can be at a point that they don't want to live anymore and be a part of the society.
From a behavioral perspective, so what you grew up, what behaviors you grew up with, sociocultural perspective, medical perspective, did you have some kind of genetic thing to begin with? So before you define it, there's different perspectives to look at it through. But really, it's just a prolonged sense of sadness, lethargy, so not kind of motivated to do anything or go anywhere. But again, it depends on how long that lasts.
The mental health community, or as we say, American Psychiatric Association, has taken up definitions for clinical depression. Like I said before, maybe someone is going through, like we recently had COVID, and a lot of people lost very, very close family members. After you lose a family member, you might go through a stage where you're grieving and you're sad. But if that state of sadness continues for a period of time, which according to American Psychiatric Association, we say if in a period of 2 weeks, you are in a state where you lose interest and pleasure and energy, and at the same time, you meet certain other criteria like you're not sleeping, you don't have an appetite, you feel very guilty, you lose your concentration. If all these cluster of symptoms happen at the same time in a period of 2 weeks, and maybe there are times when you also have thoughts that you don't want to live anymore, you want to hurt yourself or you want to hurt someone else, that's the condition when we say the person is suffering from clinical depression. And then based on the stage where the person is, we talk about treatment or we talk about the help that the person would require.
When it's centered around some kind of trauma, there's a normal amount of grief that goes into it when you're depressed, 100%. So it's very situational too. So the DSM also categorizes it. There's general, there's prolonged, and it could be accompanied by anxiety, by phobias. It really depends on the event that you went through and the surroundings that you're in.
Hi, my name is Millen. I'm a senior in high school.
Describe your experience. Have you suffered with anxiety and depression?
Yeah, I have actually. I would say that I've been diagnosed with depression for a couple of years now. It started after my mom's passing in 2019, and from that, after growing with that grief and stuff like that, it has kind of developed into something that I live with instead of something that I battle every day. I'm not diagnosed with anxiety, but I do have a couple symptoms of anxiety, which is just like struggle with conversation, stuff like that, being really like anxious in social scenarios. But I would say that during my final year of high school, I think the stress of just what senior year demands of you has heightened my symptoms of depression and stuff like that.
I'd say being born and raised into a pretty loving and comfortable family, there's this idea that if you're privileged, then you can't have depression. But in my case, it's not true. I still suffered with depression and mental health issues. And I always thought that I was fine at first, and like I never even acknowledged or knew that I had depression. But I had all these emotions and feelings inside of me that I knew that I was not happy with my life. In middle school, I came from a pretty small school. I had a class size of probably about 90 kids just in my grade. And I got pretty close to a handful amount of people. But when I transitioned to high school, it was like a really big culture shock, and it was like a big jump for me. And there was just so many things going on that I felt like I couldn't control, and it really caused my anxiety and depression to start spiking. And that's when I really knew that I was not okay. And it started with once I went into high school, I realized I didn't have that many classes with the people that I was close with from middle school. And there were so many people around me that I didn't know, and I was really uncomfortable, and I felt out of place. And this eventually caused me to feel very alone, and I just felt alone, and it felt like I didn't have anyone that I could talk to or rely to. And at the time, like, I still didn't even know what was going on. I just felt this way. So my parents didn't know, my friends didn't know. It was just something that was going on inside of me. And it's something that I had to go through as a newly high school student coming into the freshman year, straight out of middle school, to this big public school. I previously came from, like I said, a small charter school, and I just didn't know what was wrong, and I just, like I said, I just felt really alone. How did you know that you had depression?
Well, I would say knowing grief in such an intimate way. I mean, you've heard of the 5 stages of grief. It's something that a lot of people talk about, but really understanding it in an intimate way allows you to like get firsthand experience of it. And I would say that during like the first year and a half, it wasn't depression really. It was just like, the first couple stages, like denial, bargaining, stuff like that. And then following that, I would say after like the 2-year mark, it truly started being developed into depression. But at first, it's just because of the shock of it, I guess. I think grief and loss is one of the worst things humans can deal with. So it's really just a matter of like the shock of it and learning to live day by day with it. And then later on, you start to live more and more with it, and then it develops into something else. So.
When we think of an illness, we often think about physical pain or injuries. But depression is a disorder that is difficult to diagnose from an outside perspective. It is impossible to know if someone has depression just from physical appearances. Even someone who appears to be a happy person can be suffering from depression or anxiety. It is important to acknowledge this and understand that anyone could be suffering, no matter the circumstances. So what happens inside someone when they have depression?
It is, like you said, something is going on in the brain. It's a very loaded question because most of the time, how the Western world or the Western society looks at any disease, or we look at any disease, is what is the key reason or the cause, which when you said something is going on the brain, so we in our brain, the simplest way I can put it is we have a neurochemical called serotonin, which we call as a happy chemical. So when you have this neurochemical in your brain and you have certain levels of it, you're going to be happy, you're going to feel good. But there have been theories which on depression where they found out the people who were suffering from depression did have lower levels of serotonin.
Could be hormonal changes, neurotransmitters. So very much like when a person is doing drugs, there's dopamine, serotonin, and the way that those neurotransmitters are released. So the biochemistry in the brain. So neurotransmitters send messages from one side through the synapse, so just synaptic gap. It gets absorbed in the cell body, and then it goes across. Now, genetically, there could be enzymes and things hindering that neurotransmitter from firing. That's one thing. Or there can be a mass release, like with manic depressive is also considered a form of depression where you have highs and lows, and that depends on how these neurotransmitters are released. And then there are certain things, there's neuroplasticity that makes it feel better. So checking in on your physiological needs. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? How to have having a healthy brain. Exercise. All these things kind of balance the chemicals in your brain. So definitely even people that have the chronic or clinical depression, some of it can be managed without medication, which would be getting more sleep, whatever your physiological needs are, like I said. So there's ways to mitigate it without taking pills, but sometimes you need the pills to create that balance, chemical balance in your brain.
Now we are specifically talking about brain, so I wanted to focus on the neurochemicals. But we have to remember the depression is not just a neurological condition.
Yeah.
It's more of a biopsychosocial condition. I do want to split it up. What do we mean when we say biopsychosocial? Just like depression, any psychiatric condition or mental health condition are affected by what is your biological makeup, right? Like what genes did you inherit, or what biologically, physiologically, male, female, who you are. Just for example, right now, the prevalence of depression, if you see in the teenage and adults from 18 and above, it's more common in females and it's less in males. So the bio part kind of focuses on what biologically you are will affect or determine your level of depression. Psychologically, some people, when I tell some of the patients, when I explain to them, they get a little surprised that the day when the conception happened and the fetus is in the womb, they start perceiving what's going around them. When I say start perceiving, if the mother is happy or the people are happy around them, their happy chemicals are going to be start building up at that time. But at the same time, if the fetus is in the womb and has traumas going on, which trauma to the mother psychologically, trauma to around her in the family or substance use, that is going to affect the baby. So what I mean is psychologically, the trauma starts at that time. And then the last one, which I mentioned, social, is once the baby is born and it comes in this world and is being raised, how is the society around them? Like we talk about this all the time, and recently we all know right now about the book that has come out um, by Prince Harry, and he talks about how he grew up, and there are many testimony and there are many examples in the society that how you grow up and what is the society around you um, determines the level of stress and the mental trauma that you go through, and that determines your depression. The bio, the psycho, and the social determines your depression.
Trauma, environmental factors can kind of impact the chemistry in the brain, and that can be passed down in generations. So that's what epigenetics is. So if you had ancestors that had some kind of trauma, that could also be passed down and make you more susceptible.
Even though I did have my friends, it's not like I had no class with my friends, so I still had my friends around me, but things just felt different because since we didn't have all our classes together anymore, right? And a lot of my friends were making new friends, or like were new friends with people that they were friends with, but I wasn't friends with. So I'm not saying that my friends outcasted me. It's more so I kind of like outcasted myself because I felt out of place. And I self-isolated, which is something that I shouldn't have done because we need I needed people, and I needed my friends, I needed my family, and that's something that I had to deal with.
Is there a way somebody can increase these chemicals? Yes, have be in a happy surrounding, be work on yourself, or that's why what we recommend going to therapy, that you work on your trauma and then you be positive and surround yourself with positive people. So you create those scenarios and circumstances around yourself that you are only, like we say, oh, I only want to be with happy people. I don't want to be with sad people. So you train your mind. In earlier days, it was thought that once the brain is formed, it does not change. That theory has been changed, and there is something called neuronal plasticity, which means that actually our neurons are plastic. So with something called, like, we exercise our muscles and we can build our muscles and build our body, the same way there are therapies, like, for example, I don't want to throw big names, but there is something called cognitive behavioral therapy, that you can actually train your mind and work on yourself and change the patterns.
And I remember the night where I really knew that, okay, this is when I realized, oh, I am depressed. And it was New Year's of 2019 to 2020. And what happened was I've always been an emotional person, but just this night I feel like I was on the verge of an emotional breakdown, which is what eventually happened. And I remember I was playing games with my friends, and we were playing like Super Smash Bros. Or whatever. And I lost the game in a way that was really frustrating to me, and I just exploded. And at that moment, I just felt like everything was out of my hands. I felt flooded by emotions, and I realized that at that point, it wasn't even about the game anymore. It was just, I was in such a dark place emotionally that just those little things, such as playing a game, affected me to the point where um, I completely broke down and started crying, and I didn't celebrate New Year's that year. We were at a friend's house, so like my parents were mad at me because um, they felt embarrassed by the way I was acting. And I just, on the way home, they were like lecturing me, and I kind of just didn't say anything. And when they came into my room later that night, as I was sitting there in my room, still crying and still just thinking about how I feel and stuff, I told them, and I told myself that I had depression. And that was really the first step that really changed my perspective in the way that I was living my life, and changed the perspective of why I felt the way I felt.
There might be a family where it's perfect. There is no abuse, nothing. The kid has everything. They can have all the books they want, all the money they want. They're going to a very good school, but still there might be depression in the child, because sometimes we don't understand just giving materialistic thing is not the answer for depression. As a human being, us being able to express ourselves the best way we can and giving that space and freedom to us is the most important thing we could do. And there are many, many times. So when the stress comes to a very privileged kid also, like you said, a pitch perfect, and the stress starts at a very low level. How I explain it is, just imagine a dust falling on a table which is not cleaned every day. You will not see the dust day one. And for example, the kid goes to school and everybody's like, oh, look at you wearing Louis Vuitton and wearing this. You are so privileged. That can be a trauma, because the way the things are said, this having too much money or a pitch perfect scenario is being projected as something negative.
I remember there would be days where just some small things would take me off so much, and I would be in such a dark place that I had suicidal thoughts, and it felt like that it would be better if I just didn't live anymore, and that my problems would not be here anymore. It would be better if I was just not here. But it really pushed me through was that ending my life seemed selfish to my family, because not only I just felt that I needed to keep pushing through and live on, because I knew if I didn't, my family would pay the consequences. And it just was a really scary thing also. And it was something that I didn't suffer with every day, but it was often enough to where I knew that something needed to change.
You go to school next day, there are 3 more kids who gangs up against you. Oh, your father is a doctor, you have a lot of money. So now another stress, a layer of dust added. You only see the dust there when you don't clean that for maybe few days, few weeks. And this is what I always talk about, is that dust will keep settling, that stress will keep going unless we normalize the conversation about stress and mental health. And if that kid who is so-called pitch perfect and most privileged can go to a counselor in the school, or maybe can go home and talk to the family members and say, you know what, I have been feeling stressed and sad, and I really don't want to go to school anymore. And the parents are educated that, oh, maybe these are the symptoms of depression. Maybe my son is going towards. So when I say stress only does not come in the form of abuse and a negative family and yelling parents and angry parents. Stress nowadays is coming as soon as you pick up your phone, as soon as the kids now are seeing themselves in the mirror, as soon as they walk in the school and there are 10 people ready to judge them, as soon as you look a perfect model on a TV. So in olden days, it was, oh, there was a family and there was not much social media. But right now, the amount of stress, that settling dust that I'm talking about, it's coming from everywhere. The moment you open your eyes and you walk in this world, we are surrounded by eyes and people who are not even looking at you. They are sitting behind the social media and writing stuff on your Facebook post anonymously, which will tear you apart. So, one thing I want to say is there is nothing called a higher trauma or a lesser trauma. Trauma is trauma. A person getting abused or a person just being verbally, like somebody makes a face to them and then makes a face that, oh, you look like this. The trauma is same. There is no grading to the trauma, that this is higher trauma, the person got abused. Oh, and you only got yelled at, or you only got somebody made a face. The trauma, it all depends on the person who's perceiving the trauma, that how bad is this person is being affected. So all trauma is equal. What we need to do is we need to create a safe environment where people can talk about trauma. They can talk about what's going on with them.
According to the Pew Research Center, 69% of adults and 81% of teens in the US use social media. While social media may be a good resource for online connections with distant family and friends, it is shown that it can often lead to an increased risk of anxiety, depression, and illness. So why do we see such a common addiction to social media? Why do teens and adults continue to use social media if it is causing depression or anxiety? According to McLean Hospital, one does not know how many likes a picture will get, who will like the picture, and when the picture will receive likes. The unknown outcome and the possibility of the desired outcome can keep users engaged with the sites. They're searching for validation on the internet that serves as a replacement for meaningful connection they might otherwise make in real life.
There is a documentary that's really well done on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. We just finished watching it. There are former tech executives, anyone from CEOs to engineers of Facebook and others, Instagram, that admit to companies designing these tools. You even had the co-founder of the like button, right? Designing them for the purposes of gaining profit from people. Whether it was realized or not, they didn't realize that the like button was going to blow up into have negative impacts. But the reach is so deep, it actually reaches into our brainstem, which is the oldest part of our brain, and manipulates us into that kind of sense of worth, needing those relationships online. So it's a false sense of relationship. And what ends up happening is if people don't get the likes, for example, an unintended consequence of it is feeling this internalized sense of worthlessness. But they all admitted that the purpose of creating these tools is to manipulate. They design it to be addictive.
What I firmly believe, and I've always, and this is again taught by my parents, and I'm lucky to have them teach me this, is you have to do everything in moderation. Okay, so social media, the biggest problem with social media is that we feel that social media is a way of connection. Social media came into existence because someone like me, that I live thousands of miles away from my family, so I am still connected to my family through kind of like social media, like, Facebook or this and that, or WhatsApp or messages or video calls. Social media has given us this false perception of connectedness. The true essence of connectedness is never going to be achieved through social media. The true essence of connectedness is what we are doing right now. Why do you think during COVID-19 the prevalence of depression, which is normally 8 to 10% right now in the United States, jumped all the way to 40%. And this is the data from the National Institute of Mental Health. They came up with this data was because social media was still there. People were still so-called connected. But what difference this one-to-one conversation or seeing someone or being in a room with someone or talking to someone or hanging out, like we say, can do is very different than what a social media can do.
When you're an addict, that goes back to the brain chemistry, right? There's a certain amount of dopamine associated with, like, there's a rush that you get from getting all those likes, right? So then you kind of want more. So then when you want more, then you kind of, tend to get this mentality is like, okay, I'm only as good as my next post and I have to keep posting. So the addiction is, in order to get this positive return, I have to post something likable for people. And then they get caught in that cycle. So it's the same when you say addiction, it's like similar to like a drug. You get addicted to getting the attention. And we're not used to handling all those relationships at once. And then that's how we end up getting kind of depressed, and it kind of stunts our growth, the way our brains are even shaped.
There is a level of superficiality to it. And like you said, that you might think that, oh my God, I have so many friends on social media. I have. Now, nowadays, people go by what? Likes they get? How many comments? Like, there are kids and teenagers who define their identity and self-worth and self-esteem if they post a picture on Instagram, how many likes and who likes it. And we don't even know, and we don't even understand the extent how deep emotionally a teenager or a kid is being affected if they don't get a like by someone that they really like and they are waiting for that person. Nowadays, people don't even talk. And then again, I don't want to say people, it's become a norm that you text, you don't disturb people. You just text, you don't even call, and you don't talk on phone. So social media has many, 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 many benefits to it. But there are a lot of people who are putting themselves on social media and being vulnerable. And there are other people who are sitting behind the social media and saying stuff that when they have no idea what other person is going through mentally, which is very, very, very common in your age group or school-going kids. And I just think it is creating this superficial and fake level of connectedness, which is hurting us as a society. It's okay, it's good to connect on social media, but to keep those people very close, have few people that you want to keep close in your life, that you want to have frequent visits with, hang out with, talk with, go watch a movie, go do walks. Still have that core group of people around you, and do not create this superficial social media cloud and then just be sucked up in it and then make all your perception based on, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, I'm not beautiful enough, I am not strong enough, I'm not man enough, I'm not pretty enough. All those are created when we just make our personality based on who we are on a profile of Instagram or Facebook or TikTok.
So how has the pressure of school and the IB program affected your mental health?
Well, I will say that Ivy Diploma has definitely been a great trigger in my depression. They're definitely not joking when they say that you need to be aware of the type of student that you are and the limits that you have in order to pursue something as rigorous as Ivy Diploma. When I made the decision in my sophomore year to pursue diploma instead of certificate, it was a really last minute decision. I kind of just changed my mind. It was a little bit impulsive. Um, and there are times where I really do regret it because there are days where I sacrifice my mental health and my well being in order to do things to the best of my ability, or sacrifice sleep and stuff like that, which would help you combat depression, and using that instead of, or doing homework or projects like that instead of, taking care of yourself. And senior year, I think, is something that all seniors kind of struggle with a little bit. I mean, senioritis, there's lots of projects, lots of things going on. So I think those two things, the workload of IB diploma and just senioritis, the stigma around senior year, has definitely impacted me in a negative way. But I think it's more of a trial and error type thing, because if you're going to keep going to school, doing it every day, there are some methods that you're going to find work better for you than others. So, yeah, it definitely has affected me, but you can find a way to work around it.
I was always that student all my life where I always went the extra step beyond to try to be the best. And that ultimately was just not healthy. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't try your best in school, but it was to the point where the only thing I was doing in my life was going to school, going home, playing video games, and then going back to school. I had very little balance in my life. I was not very fit, athletic, physically and mentally. I was not in a good spot.
It's been really rough. I think COVID really detached us from each other. It's that live conversation, that in-person connection that we're all wired to have. But definitely on just having the workload, being addicted to the phones, it's just, there's never a break. Students always are catching up on work, doing this, doing that. The classroom is not set up for 2023 life, So I try to do activities where students get to move around or use different modalities, because again, not everyone learns the same, right? Some of us are visual learners, some of us are auditory, and that, especially with COVID, has, we call it differentiation, so we have to differentiate more. So there's more individual needs now than there was before, and having 35 to 40 kids in a classroom is just hard to manage. Plus, there's students that have not so great of a home life, so being home for all that time kind of changed them. All the responsibilities they have gotten worse with their taking, say, brothers and sisters to school, all the chores they have to do. They have second jobs, so it's just really taking a toll. And just having them like stare at their phones. I mean, just constantly comparing themselves to others, and just not taking breaks. Like, I don't know if they're ever with themselves. It's like constant input.
Going into junior year, it was the first time we were coming back to in-person school. And I was not excited for school, of course, but I was excited to see my friends again and to start going into like physical classes to see teachers and friends. And at the time, I was really studying hard for the SAT. And the SAT was something that I've put a lot of expectations for myself, especially growing up with an older brother who did very well in the SAT and was already accepted to a good university. And I just had all these pressure and expectations for myself so I could be as good as him or even better than him in order to the expectations of myself and to make my parents proud, I guess, and ultimately like get into a good college. I was not doing very well in my practice tests, in the practice in the day to day, and I just was I kept making the same mistakes over and over again, and I felt like I was at a mental roadblock. And I remember one day I was practicing the SAT, and it felt like I just got like every single question wrong almost. And at that moment, I just had another breakdown. And I just felt like that I wasn't good enough. I had no purpose in my life, that I didn't want. I was trying so hard, but there was no results. It felt like what I was doing was completely pointless. And I thought to myself, I'm studying so hard to do well in the SAT, to try to get into a college, which I don't even know what college I want to go yet, what I want to do in college, and what I'm going to do in my 50 plus year career. And one thing I know for sure is that working a day-to-day 9 to 5 in an office was something that I absolutely do not want to do. And just that thought made me extremely depressed.
I would really say that do not attach your worth to anything outside of yourself. Everyone is worthy. We're here together, right, on earth. Don't attach your worth to a like on Facebook, or if a teacher, you're not liking how a teacher is teaching, or what friends say about you. Try to create a sense of self. And your productivity doesn't determine your worth either. You all are so young, and you have a huge life ahead of you, and you have a lot of options. Just kind of be honest, lead with integrity. The people who are committed to misunderstanding you, then just move on from that. But I'd say the most important relationship to build is with yourself.
The key word that I'm going to use here is balance. That I'm going to have a social media profile, but I'm going to work on myself, and even if I get peer pressure, I am still going to have a balance, and I'm going to only post what I feel is right, what I feel is good for my mental health, what is positive for me. And so you have rules. So basically what you have is you have your own wall and guard around you in this crazy world of social media, when everybody is coming and attacking you from all the sides. So what I usually tell, and usually this is with the teenagers, they ask me, this is the most common question with this social media, is how can you think I'm not going to be affected if somebody comments on my post and say, oh my God, your dress was ugly, right? And this is what we are talking about, is because this is what I call is you making yourself vulnerable.
Be vulnerable means to sacrifice comfort and pride to allow oneself to be prone to emotional response. To many, vulnerability is very scary and difficult to show toward other people, even those they are closest with. However, vulnerability is important for creating true intimacy, an important aspect of building love, trust, and safety. To be vulnerable to another is often one of the first steps to combating depression and anxiety. It is important to create a safe space and understand the importance of one's vulnerability.
I think that the basis of human life and human nature is to be vulnerable with one another. We all want to make connections with one another. We all want to love. We all want to be loved. And being vulnerable is one of the first steps in that. And I would say that's one of the biggest things that I struggle with, and which is why I probably struggled with undiagnosed and unmedicated depression for so long. And I think that being vulnerable and allowing people in and allowing people to see who you truly are for all of your flaws and help you when you're feeling down is just so vital to human life, and that without it, it probably, let's just say your life probably will not be as great as it would be if you were able to talk to people. And yeah, vulnerability is incredibly important. And it's something that I've struggled with, and I'm working on it right now, actually. It was my New Year's resolution to be more vulnerable to people. And I think that a lot of great can come from being vulnerable, and granted, a lot of bad can come as well. But the connections that you make and the way you're able to heal wounds that you maybe didn't even know existed within you, are it's a very transformative thing. And vulnerability is just, I would say, one of the biggest medicines, one of like the greatest therapies that you can take, really. Speaking to people, letting people in, and making sure that other people know you're there as well.
Being vulnerable is not being weak. So the answer is not to not be on social media. When you make yourself vulnerable, there is another quality you need to keep working in the background: resiliency. You have to make yourself strong enough that the third person that does not know me, if they come and comment on my profile or anything, I'm going to deal with this vulnerability as a strength, not as a weakness. I'm putting myself on social media, I'm putting my emotions, I'm putting stuff. But if you don't want to listen to my positive stuff, like you said, oh, I did a meditation today, and then 4 kids come and they're like, oh, you're meditating, are you hippie, are you this, that? Then you tell yourself, your resiliency kicks in, that you've been working in your own zone with your own close group of human to human. You cannot have human connection with millions of people on social media. Your close group of people, you use your strength and your resiliency, and then you apply it to your vulnerability you have put in front millions of people on social media, and then you use it as your power. That vulnerability is your power, not your weakness.
Since my mom's passing, I think a lot of people are aware of that and what happened, since it happened in middle school and I was in a tight-knit community. There was not very many people at that middle school, you would know. So that has kind of opened the gates for people to know that I have struggled with something. So if they're struggling with something similar, then they can come talk to me about it, ask questions. And I will always be grateful for those people who find a safe space in me. I would love to be that type of person for my friends. But there also is a line to be crossed where you kind of sacrifice your own mental health in order to improve the people around you. And as someone who tends to be a people pleaser, and wants to uplift the people around me, in the moment I think, oh, it's okay, I'll deal with it later, and try to help the people that I love. But once you look at the bigger picture in the long run, it does tend to have a negative effect on you in specific. And yeah, in my family, for example, I'm the only feminine person, because we're a family of 3 and my mom passed away. And I was kind of seen as like this person who can take upon the roles of my mom. And that also, I think, that also affected my processing through grief, because I was supporting the other people in my family as well as trying to get through it myself. So it's a give and take that has to have a balance.
Looking back, as a guy as a male in this society, who struggled with depression and mental health, I really felt the pressures of toxic masculinity and the idea of suppressing your emotions because you are a guy. And I realized that this is a very toxic and unhealthy way and perspective to deal and address with your issues. And I learned that it's okay to not be okay, and to show your emotions and to be vulnerable. I think that's the most important thing, is just being vulnerable, not only to yourself, but to the people around you, to the people close to me. And once I was vulnerable, and once I accepted and told the people around me that this was something I was struggling with, that's really the first step for me, that I started to improve and get better.
So would you say you had to create a positive image or suppress your emotions in order to like appear strong to the people you're helping?
Yeah, I definitely do think so because if someone's coming to you talking about their own issues and their own struggles, then it would be a little bit selfish to also um, be in a vulnerable state for those who are also in a vulnerable state. And um, I just think that presenting yourself to be a like stronger, more stable person to talk to makes the other person comfortable. And most most moments that really isn't the truth. And or like that isn't how you actually feel. So there is some sort of masking that comes along with that. And it can be difficult, but it might also be necessary in order to maintain the relationships that you have with people because part of having close relationships with people is making sure that they're doing okay mentally and checking in on them and doing stuff like that. So sometimes you will have to do that. It might be inevitable, but it's also something that you should keep to a minimum at least.
We live in a society structured with many social standards. From a young age, we are taught standards such as the clothes we wear or how we speak. But a social standard strongly linked to depression is the expectations of what it means to be a man or a woman. It is not harmful to identify or associate with masculine or feminine traits. However, it can be harmful when certain social standards suppress an individual's true feelings. The term toxic masculinity refers to when men feel pressured to only show strength, and anything less is a sign of weakness. This is especially dangerous to individuals struggling with depression because they tend to avoid seeking help and addressing the problem. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, 45,979 Americans died by suicide in 2020. From the data collected, men died by suicide 3.88 times more than women. But it is also important to understand the implications of toxic masculinity on not just men, but also women and other gender identities. Some individuals may not attribute themselves to masculinity or femininity. As a result, this can lead to exclusion for both male and female identifying individuals if they do not conform to societal expectations. It is important to educate ourselves and others about the damaging effects on certain societal standards. By promoting a culture of open communication and emotional expression, we as a society can work on breaking down harmful gender stereotypes and expectations.
And there is a negative side to it, and that's why it's called toxic masculinity. And I don't like to refer to it as toxic masculinity. I feel like being masculine or being feminine is a very pure energy. You know, it's an energy. It's kind of like, now we all know that sexuality is kind of like a spectrum, right? So it becomes a problem, or what we call toxic masculinity is a problem when this being masculine or being feminine is dictated by the society, or there are organized rules that a society puts on us. If you identify as a male, there is a certain way you have to dress, there is a certain way you have to act, there is a certain way you have to talk, there is a certain way you have to move. On top of that, that is the biggest problem, is there's a certain way you have to behave. Like it said, you need to man up. Put your big boy's pants. Why is it not said to in this context that, oh, you need to now feminine up or female up? No, it's always you need to man up. So as males, we are always taught and told that you do not ask for help, you do not cry, you are the breadwinner, you take the responsibility of the family, you take care of the family. So just imagine if you are the person taking care of the family and then you cry, it was believed that the whole family will crumble down. But the problem there was then you lose touch with your own self.
Well, I'm aware and I understand the stigma that surrounds specifically um, depression, mental health, stuff like that, and masculinity, and how men, boys are not able to truly express their struggles or the things that are on their mind without also having to consider the fact that they might look weak or that they have to take these things on head first in order to prove their masculinity. And as a person who isn't a man, I don't have to worry about those things. And it definitely is it's a patriarchal structure that benefits me in some way, even though it really isn't the greatest thing in hindsight. But I never had to deal with those kind of things. And I know that the people around me, specifically my male friends around me who are experiencing difficult emotional and mental struggles in their lives, aren't able to be as open and just emotional about the things that they go through. And that's one of the things that really does help with your mental health, being able to talk to people about it. But I understand that's a big obstacle for a lot of people. And I benefit from that without having to deal with it. But I would also say that my femininity has kind of made me some sort of like nurturing figure in other people's lives. And as much as I like to help other people with their mental health and stuff like that, it can be a little bit damaging and a lot to handle because people see you as someone they can talk to and stuff like that. And you kind of internalize those things and then they begin to negatively affect you as well. So there's definitely two different sides to that coin. It's really just the patriarchy and how it negatively affects people. But overall, I would say that my femininity has granted me like this grace space to be able to talk about my feelings and stuff like that without having to worry about how people perceive me and stuff.
You lose touch with your own emotions. You become this plastic masculine person who's functioning a robot, how the society wants you to run. And that's where those places is where depression, anxiety, trauma, stress is born, right? We live in a world we are in 2023. It's not like males are the breadwinner. It could be the female. There would be a family that female brings money to the house and the male is taking care of the kids and is a stay-home dad. But that I do think needs a lot of work. And I think all the males should remind themselves that just being a male gender does not mean that you are, if you ask for help, if you cry, if you talk about your depression, if you talk about, you're going to be any less of a man. And that's why I always tell my patient, and whenever I'm having a conversation, I tell them, you know what, being masculine is an energy. And you're actually, to be a good human being and to live a happy life, just having a masculine energy is not enough. Everybody has a little bit of feminine energy. Maybe some guys, they drink and then they want to dance. Because the biggest problem, like I will tell you an example. We go I go to the gym and then sometime I go and attend classes like Zumba or Strong Nation or other kind of classes. You will not see many males attending those classes because it is the gender conforming that, oh, men, we don't dance, we don't move. So, but there is a lot of happiness that a male can get when they dance. So this society being divided into the rules and the laws that a male has to follow and a female has to follow is the breeding ground for mental health issues. Because there are people who, like I said, who are on a spectrum. They might be male, but if they enjoy knitting, they don't become a female.
Yeah.
If they enjoy anything feminine, candle making, I don't know, so the society for years and years and years have divided us. The problem in today's world is this division. We all have to come together and if you see masculinity and being feminine as an energy, it will be so much easier for you um, to respect everyone and judge everyone for who they are. And whatever I'm saying about males is equally important for female. Oh, she's a girl, she cries too much. Or, oh, you can't do this construction work, you are a female. You're not. So, no, that's not true.
I have been going to therapy. I think that, I mean, I know it's a pretty cliche thing to say, but everybody does say that if you're struggling, talk to someone about it. And I think that's a pretty effective way of dealing with it. Um, I would say I'm a pretty self-aware person. So whenever I do feel like, because it comes in waves, so whenever I do feel like the heights of it, I'm able to recognize it and make decisions that would be in my best interest, like voicing certain things to my therapist or talking to my close family and friends about certain things. Because once you get things off your chest, you don't feel like you're the only person dealing with it. You have a support system around you. Um, so I would say talking about it is probably the best way that I personally deal with it.
One other thing that really helped me through my battle towards mental health and depression was improving my own physical health. Growing up, I was always a very skinny kid. I was not confident at all. I didn't like the way my body looked, and the lifestyle I was living was very unhealthy. I wasn't eating enough, I was not exercising, I was eating unhealthy foods, and I was not sleeping that well either. I started going to the gym, and being a very skinny kid who was just starting out, it was a very scary thing. But I went with a friend, so that helped me to get out of my comfort zone and push. And just working out every single day, or almost every single day, has been something that has been very rewarding to me. Not only do I feel better physically, I look better, I'm more confident in myself, and I realized that there was a correlation with my physical body feels better, which correlated to my mental health being better.
So we can't level up. We can't self-actualize unless we have our basic needs met, right? So do we have enough sleep? Because without it, if you get deprivation, you'll start to hallucinate, right? So your brain and body work together. Each part of the brain is in control of functions of the body, right? And then when you're experiencing things with your senses, right, when you see, hear, taste, smell, your body is reacting to that, your brain's reacting to that. So without, say, sleep or food, your body will tell you, and you might have these outward negative behaviors, like you might become angry, or you might become, right, your organs might shut down. So your brain and body work together, and your brain has the nervous system, which goes down your spine and is in control of your motor skills. You have your temporal lobe, which is your hearing. So everything that's inside is translated. You also have a mechanism on the outside to absorb. So that's there's input, like what we take in our environmental, the nurture of things, and then there's the nature, what we come with. So we have these functions that allow us to adapt to our outside world, starting with our 5 senses and parts and functions of the brain. So each part of the brain connects to parts of the body.
The first and the foremost thing is education about it. You need to understand, just for example, if someone has diabetes, their doctor will give them all this knowledge and education about what it is and what to eat and what not to eat, and you can't have sugar and you can have carbs. The same way, if you're having even symptoms of depression or you are at the stage of mild depression, you need to be very well educated what depression looks like. Second thing, the most important thing in mental health is having your family or loved ones or close net people that you are around be educated about it and normalize it and talk about it and not talk in a way that, oh, you have depression. You know, um, shaming is the biggest problem that we deal with when it comes to specifically depression or mental health issues in teenagers or school going kids. That is one thing I think is the basic. Your education, you need to get educated first of all, what depression is, what it is, what are the symptoms, and how I should not be ashamed if I have depression or if I struggled with depression. And then it extends to the immediate family members that they should not be ashamed, they should be very educated, and they should talk about it and normalize it.
Well, yeah, I am seeing a therapist, and that mainly happened just because confided in my dad finally about the things that I have been struggling with. Um, During the first half of senior year, I was experiencing um, a level of depression I never had before, and it had gotten to a level that I wasn't able to combat just by myself, and I needed some assistance. And I decided that it would be in my best interest to tell my dad and to talk about it with someone who would be able to actually um, help me, and he did. And we scheduled a therapy appointment, and yeah, I would say that really did help. They definitely don't lie when they say that therapy is something that everybody needs, even those who don't experience any mental hardships or anything like that. But yeah, I am seeing professional help, and it's been very beneficial.
I think definitely when they tell you who they are or explain themselves, you believe them the first time. Give them a safe space to share their vulnerabilities. Tell them that it's okay, that you're there to support them. Encourage them to, just get out and walk and try. And I think support is the biggest thing, instead of telling them what to do and believing them, because there's so much stigma involved in people not believing that others are really sick. So I think having that support system and knowing that you'll be there for them is the best.
I think everything else will fall in place if we could take those two first steps. The person who's suffering from it and the people around. Because many times what happens is, even if you're educated and you are in that midst of that dark cloud that I said, that's when your family can technically show you that, honey, it happened to you before. You are not depression. It is not. It's kind of like a Venn diagram. There is this overlap right now, but this cloud will pass. And that's why the social support and the peer support is the most important thing, to tackle it early on. And then moving on to, which I say, treatment in terms of medications or in terms of therapy. And let's not undermine the importance of lifestyle, diet, and exercise. These are the three things that are very rarely talked about as preventive measures, but I would say these three things are really, really important for a mental state, to prevent your depression or your mental state to get worse.
But I think when I say learning about yourself, I mean anatomy. I mean, we have these bodies, right? We have these brains. Learning the functions of them and how they work is like the physicalities of who we are, and then the spiritual side of who we are. Do that journey when you're younger, because there's people that have died or that grow old who never really lived. And I think having the courage to articulate your feelings to someone else and to be able to feel your feelings and go through the emotions is a very brave thing to do. But it's definitely the first step.
My message today would probably be that Own and accept that you are struggling with mental health or depression, because that is the first step in order to get better. And it's okay to be feeling the way you're feeling. We all have value in this world, even though it may not feel like anybody is giving you that value or making you feel valued. You are important. And that is something that I had to tell myself. I am important. And just, there is no easy fix. There is no magic pill in order to fix depression. It's a battle and journey that is different for every single person who has to go through depression. And for me, time was the biggest healing factor. Time was what I needed in order to get through. And while I can't say for sure that my depression is completely gone, it's something that I still struggle with every now and then. I can say I've gotten a lot better since the beginning of my freshman year in high school.
I really would love to have my final words as I would love to see a world where we can talk about depression and anxiety and other mental health condition, just like we talk about diabetes and hypertension, any other medical problem or any other medical condition. So removing that shame and talking about mental health issues as if like a badge. Oh yeah, I have it and I'm getting help for it, and be proud of it. I mean, that would be my last message. If and you know, change happens with one person at a time, and I try to do that in my life. If all I would send the message is, if you are one of those persons, something, and I know everybody suffers from depression or anxiety or some emotional turmoil. If you don't even want to name it as depression or anxiety, just be the change, be the agent, be the change, talk about it, own it, and you'll and I think you'll see the change.
To own it, to tell other people about it, make it known, accept your emotions, don't be afraid to be vulnerable, and if you need to get help, then don't be scared to get help. Find something that you like to do. Find a hobby that you like to do. Find a person that you like to be with. Find anything to take your mind away from the emotions that flood you. And if there's a root of your problem, don't run away from the problem. Identify the problem and try to create a game plan or a strategy in order to address the problem. It may not be an instant fix. It may take weeks, months, years even. But just take a few steps and progress every single day. And ultimately, strive to just be and do the best that you can.